शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। ॐ सिन्दूरारुणविग्रहां त्रिनयनां माणिक्यमौलिस्फुरत्तारानायकशेखरां स्मितमुखीमापीनवक्षोरुहां पाणिभ्यां मलिपूर्णरत्नचषकं रक्तोत्पलं बिभ्रतीं सौम्यां रत्नघटस्थरक्तचरणां ध्यायेत् परामम्बिकाम्। ध्यायेन्नित्यं महेशं रजतगिरिनिभं चारुचन्द्रावतंसं रत्नाकल्पोज्ज्वलांगं परशुमृगवराभीतिहस्तं प्रसन्नं पद्मासीनं समन्तात् स्तुतममरगणैः व्याघ्रकृत्तिं वसानम् विश्वाद्यं विश्वबीजं निखिलभयहरं पञ्चवक्त्रं त्रिनेत्रम्। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुर्गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करम्। सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्ससुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्।
धृतराष्ट्र उवाच धर्मक्षेत्रे कुरुक्षेत्रे समवेतायुयुत्सवः मामकाः पाण्डवाश्चैव किमकुर्वत सञ्जय। श्रीभगवानुवाच क्लैप्यं मास्मकमः पार्थ नैतत्त्वयुपपद्यते क्षुद्रं हृदय दौर्बल्यं त्यक्त्वोत्तिष्ठ परन्तप। यो माम् अजम् अनादिं च वेत्ति लोकमहेश्वरम् असम्मूढः समर्थ्येषु सर्वपापैः प्रमुच्यते। एतां विभूतिं योगं च मम यो वेत्ति तत्त्वतः सोऽविकम्पेन योगेन युज्यते नात्र संशयः। तेषां सततयुक्तानां भजतां प्रीतिपूर्वकं ददामि बुद्धियोगं तं येन माम् उपयान्ति ते। तेषामेवानुकम्पार्थम् अहम् अज्ञानजं तमः नाशयाम्यात्मभावस्थो ज्ञानदीपेन भास्वता। हन्ता ते कथिष्यामि दिव्या ह्यात्मविभूतयः प्राधान्यतः कुरु श्रेष्ठ नास्त्यन्तो विस्तरस्य मे। अहमात्मा गुडाकेश सर्वभूताशयस्थितः अहमादिश्च मध्यं च भूतानामन्त एव च सर्गाणामादिरन्तश्च मध्यं चैवाहमर्जुन। अध्यात्मविद्याविद्यानां वादः प्रवदताम् अहम् यच्चापि सर्वभूतानां बीजं तदहमर्जुन न तदस्ति विना यत् स्यात् मया भूतं चराचरम् नान्तोऽस्ति मम दिव्यानां विभूतीनां परन्तप एष तुद्देशतः प्रोक्तो विभूतेर्विस्तरो मया यत् यत् विभूतिमत्सत्त्वं श्रीमदूर्जितमेव वा तत्तद् एवावगच्छत्वं मम तेजोंश संभवम्.
Thank you, Rishi. Very nice. Acha, so Rakesh, you had given some, there was some discussion. We are in 13, 20.
23, Professor. 23 finished last time.
That's what I thought, yeah. So, very beautiful. Kshetra Kshetragya. We are resuming after a bit of a break. So, let us quickly summarize what we have been reading. So, Kshetra is the field, Kshetragya, knower of the field. And in the beginning, Bhagavan says, this body is called the field. So, Kshetra is defined, and knower of it is a Kshetragya. And that knowledge is the real knowledge. So, Bhagavan is exciting the Arjuna and the reader's interest by saying the importance of this knowledge. And he sets forth Tat Samasena Meshrunu. I'll tell you what this Kshetra is, what is its transformations, Vikari. And it has been sung in various rich and chandas, and also in the Brahma Sutras, in reasoned and definitive words. And then he says, Mahabhutan, the great elements, Ahankara, Buddhi, unmanifest also. All these, 10 senses and one the mind, 5 objects of the senses, all these are the Kshetra. Right? These are the transformations of Prakriti. And then Ichha, Dveshaha, Sukham, Dukkham, all these are also Kshetra, Samasena. So then what is the one? The one who knows this. And then before that he says the Amanitvam. What is Jnanam? These are the characteristics of Jnana. And there is a long sequence, which I said is very powerful and useful for memorization. So at the end of it, he says that all this is Jnanam, and what is not is Ajnanam. Then he says, now I tell you what is the one to be known, Jneyam, which is the imperishable, Supreme Brahman, without a beginning, Anadim, Mat Param Brahma. And so, on all sides, having all, this is like the Purusha Suktam, apparently possessing all sense organs and their properties, but in truth devoid them all, unattached and veritably sustaining them all, Gunatita, Nirgunam Gunabhotra. And then Bahirantascha, and then Durastham cha Antikecha, far and near. In all it abides undivided. Avibhaktam cha bhuteshu, vibhaktamiva, yet it seems divided. The noble is the sustainer of being, their consumer and generator. Bhuta bhartrucha tadnyayam, grasishnu prabhavishnu cha. Jyotisham, light of all lights, Jyotihi. And then beyond darkness, Jnanam, Gyeyam, Jnanagamyam. The noble is knowledge, accessible through knowledge, and Hridi Sarvasya Vishtitam. Thus have been set forth the field, knowledge, and the noble. Iti kshetram tatha jnanam gyeyam choktam samasatah. Mad bhakta etad vijnaya mad bhavaya upapadyate. My devotee becomes fit for assimilation to me by knowing this. Now Bhagavan says, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Vidhayan Adi Ubhavapi Vikaranscha Gunanscha Vidhi Prakriti Sambhavan. So, know both Prakriti and Purusha. Now, this is Sankhya philosophy. To be beginningless, also basis of yoga philosophy. Also know the transformations and the constituents are born of Prakriti. So then, Karya Karana Kartrutve. Prakriti is said to be the cause that accomplishes the effects and the instruments in the form of the body and the senses. Purushaha Sukha Dukkhanam Bhoktrutve Heturuchyate. Purusha is the cause of the experience of pleasures and pains. Purusha lodged in Prakriti experiences the constituents born of Prakriti, Prakritijan Gunam, Karanam Guna Sangovasya, because of clinging to the constituents, attachment, Sat Asat Yoni Janmasu, cause of his birth in goods, in wombs both good and evil. Upadrashta, close observer, Bharta, Bhokta, Maheshwaraha, giver of Anumanta, giver of sanction, sustainer, experiencer, preeminent Lord, Paramatma iti cha api uktaha. Thus is styled the Purusha in this body. Dehe asmin Purusha paraha. And then this very critical verse, which we ended last time. Ya evam vetti Purusham prakritim cha gunais saha sarvatha vartamanopi nasa bhuyo abhijayate. Whoso thus knows the spirit, Purusha, and his power, Prakriti, together with the constituents, is no more born, no matter how he fares in the world. Whoso knows, as has been set forth, the spirit directly as self, as here am I, and also the power or Prakriti as nescience, together with the constituents that are its own modifications, is no more born, is no more embodied after the fall of the knower's body. Api, though, no matter how, implies that for one who does not deviate from his proper being, the question of re-embodiment does not arise at all. Now, 24, please.
ध्यानेनात्मनि पश्यन्ति केचिदात्मानमात्मना अन्ये सांख्येन योगेन कर्मयोगेन चापरे.
Dhyanena, instrumental, by the process of meditation. Atmani, in the self. Pashyanti, they see. Kechid, some. Atmanam, Atmana. So, some see the self, Purusha, the imperishable, in the limited self, because it is present in every field. How? By the process of the mind. Atmana meaning by controlling the mind. So, there are three Atmas there. Right? And they all have to be understood. So, Atmani, locative case. There it is meant within the individual, aggregate of body, senses, so forth, all that have been listed before. In that particular instantation of the field, Atmani. Atmana, and what do they see? Atmanam, that is the Purusha, the true self, with a capital S. And yet it says Atmana, how? By means of the mind, because the mind is what is operated in meditation, worked on. Anye Sankhyena Yoga, others by the yoga of Sankhya, already elucidated in chapter 2 as the supreme and you may say most direct explication of the truth was chapter 2. Bhagavan first gave Arjuna the truth directly. But it was hard to grasp. Yeah? Generally, if one recites the verses of chapter 2 to someone who has recently been bereaved, you will not make yourself popular. Right? Because the mind is agitated at that point. On account of deep attachment, the mind is deeply agitated. Even if it is narrated to one who is in relatively calm state of mind, the concepts are very difficult to grasp if one has not had direct experience of the self. It may seem very remote and outlandish. Right? So therefore, from chapter 3 onwards, all the other approaches were described so that Arjuna may benefit and come to see. And then others by karma yogena cha apare. So that's quite straightforward. Right? By means of meditation. Meditation is one pointed thought. Dhyanena. Dhyanam nama shabdadibhyo vishayebhyah shrotradini karanani manasi upasamhritya. In the mind, concentrating all the sense organs. Manascha pratyak chetayitari. And fixing the mind on the inner self. Ekagrataya yat chintanam tat dhyanam. In Yoga Sutra it says desha chittasya bandha dharana. Fixing the mind on one point location. Then ekatanayata, keeping the same thought again and again. This is dhyanam. So that ekagrataya yat chintanam. Dhyayativa bakaha, dhyayativa prithvi, dhyayantiva parvataha. Hence the following usages. The stork meditates as it were. The earth meditates as it were. The mountains meditate as it were. Chandogya Upanishad 761. From these analogies, it follows that meditation is incessant thought in an unbroken stream like a current of oil, which is why we have Abhishekam. When you go to the temple, you do Abhishekam. That is to remind you that that's how the mind should be in meditation. In our Ayurvedic practice, there is something called Shirodhara. In this practice, the patient is placed on the cot and a steady stream of oil is applied. It has very powerful effect on mind. It's a great cure for mental diseases, very powerful for stabilizing the mind. So, like Shirodhara, Abhishekam, they're all practical examples of dhyana, meditation itself. Right? So, what is the iti upama upadanat tailadharavat santatah avichinna pratyayah, unbroken stream, dhyanam, tena dhyanena atmani buddho pashyanti आत्मानं प्रत्यक् चेतनम् आत्मना स्वेनैव प्रत्यक् चेतनेन ध्यान संस्कृतेन अंतःकरणेन केचित् योगिनः. So like I said, that self, the instrumental case of the self applies to the mind, to the antahkarana. अन्ये सांख्येन योगेन, सांख्यं नाम इमे सत्व रजस् तमसांसि गुणाः मया दृश्याः अहं तेभ्यः अन्यः. The Sankhya means analytic thought. These are the constituents, sattva, rajas, and tamas. The self is their opposite, being the witness of their operations. Tad vyapara sakshibhutah nityah guna vilakshanah atma. However, even Sankhya philosophy cannot be so easily understood without some dhyanam. After all, how do we know what is sattva, rajas, tamas? It is by, in fact, meditation on those very gunas, on those very constituents. So the person who accesses directly through Sankhya has already done some meditation, some dhyana. Without that, though, that kind of thinking cannot become permanent. Right? So, this thought is a yoga by which they see the self by the self. The last phrase being understood. Karma yoga here, karma itself is the yoga. It is being performed as an offering to God. It is done for securing yoga. Hence it is styled yoga qualitatively. By it, through mind's purity and the resulting knowledge, yet others perceive the self. Remember that karma is for chitta shuddhi. Once that chitta shuddhi has happened, purifying of the mind and resulting knowledge, others perceive the self. Right? So, please 25.
अन्ये त्वेवमजानन्तः श्रुत्वान्येभ्य उपासते तेऽपि चातितरन्त्येव मृत्युं श्रुतिपरायणाः.
Some anye tu eva evam ajanantah, not knowing thus. Shrutva anyebhya upasate, sandhi. Some, however, not knowing these things, hear from others about the self. Te api cha atitaranti, they also overcome by swimming, literally, overswim. Atirtaranti eva. Mrityum, what do they overswim? Death. Shruti parayana, through the knowledge of the Shruti. Right? By knowing the Veda itself. Right? So, however, not knowing the self described in any of the ways mentioned above, अन्ये तु एतेषु विकल्पेषु अन्यतमेन अपि एवं यथोक्तम् आत्मानम् अजानन्तः अन्येभ्यः आचार्येभ्यः श्रुत्वा, taking instructions from others, idam evam chintayata iti uktaha upasate. They think about the self and worship or meditate with reverence. They also overcome death or transmigratory life whose end is death, samsara. They are intent on hearing, having hearing as their sole form of endeavor on the road to liberation. Shruti parayana. They seek right cognition through the instruction of their teachers. The point is that they do not themselves discriminate. So, swayam viveka rahitaha iti abhiprayah. किमु वक्तव्यं प्रमाणं प्रति स्वतंत्राः विवेकिनः मृत्युम अतिक्रामन्ति इति. Of course, those who do discriminate and independently pursue right cognition do overcome death. This is a very powerful and important verse, right? Because it says one may accomplish this through yoga or through Sankhya, or through karma yoga one may purify the mind, and the resulting effects will then also lead to the self. But a person who is even unaware of these things, even that person can attain by the simple process of listening to the acharyas who are able to instruct. They hear from others about the self and they do upasati. So now, kshetragyam cha api mam vidhi iti kshetragya ishvarai ekatva vishayam jnanam moksha sadhanam. So knowing the kshetragya is identical with the Lord, the identity of the field knower and God. This point is the knowledge which is the moksha sadhanam, the means to liberation. Yat jnatva amritam ashnute, 13:12, knowing which the seeker enjoys immortality, the nectar of immortality. Tat kasmat hetoriti. Why is that so? Why is it so that the means to liberation is the knowledge of the identity of the field knower and God? Tad dhetu pradarshanaartham shlokaha arabhyate yasmat. In order to clarify that point. But before we move on, any questions on 24 and 25?
Professor, comparing meditation with the oil, like incessant oil, means like cleaning up, or I'm trying to understand that analogy or relation between them, Professor.
It's the constancy of thought.
Okay. Okay, Professor. Yeah.
So, desha bandhas chittasya dharana, right? Desha bandha, in a location binding one's consciousness is called dharana, which is the precursor, the prerequisite for dhyanam. Then, tatra pratyaya ekatanata dhyanam. There, keeping that pratyaya, the concept, continuously is dhyanam, uninterrupted mental focus on that particular concept, whatever that concept be. Of course, in yoga, it is recommended, various kinds of meditations are recommended on, they may be what are called savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara, etc. The earlier meditations are on images, a holy image, a symbol such as the pranava itself, the omkara, or the image of the Lord, of one's Ishtadevata. It may be the image of Guru, yatha abhimatava, whatever is pleasing to the mind actually at that point and inspiring. So that particular mental image or concept, or it may be mantra meditation, in which case it is meditation on the syllables of the mantra. But whatever it is, the mind has to be trained to keep that pratyaya, that concept, continuously in its focal point. Because normally what happens, it is very easy for the mind to get scattered, as you know. Even if you're sitting and studying, let us say you start in a beautiful, fresh study period. You get up in the morning, you've had your bath, you've done your prayers and meditation, you had your light breakfast, and you are in a perfect state to study. And you start studying, or you're doing your work. How long does the concentration last? Not long. Actually, nowadays there is this Pomodoro technique. I don't know, have you heard of it? It's a focus technique. A Pomodoro is a tomato in Italian. So the idea is to focus for 20 minutes and then break for 5 minutes. So for some reason, a lot of modern recent theory has agreed on the point that we pay attention for at most 20 minutes on something. Actually, 20 minutes in meditation is an infinitely long time. Okay, but I'm talking here in the waking state, which is not quite a meditation, but it's a focus. So the idea is you focus for 20 minutes. In fact, there are some very nice apps on the cell phone now. So you can start the focus and you turn it upside down so you don't look at the phone, because that's the most common trap for and distraction for us. And then if that is placed down in 20 minutes, it'll beep. And then you've completed your 20-minute focus. So the idea is in that time, you focus on a piece of work and you finish it. But this thing that we call work itself is actually a sequence of concepts. It's not one concept. Although you think you're working, yes, work is a large umbrella, but within that you're doing many things, right? Meditation is qualitatively different in the sense that first you have to do dharana. So you have to fix the mind at one point, whether it's a spatial location between the eyebrows, or you internally locate a place and you're going to fix your focus there. And then in that place, you are going to keep one concept in the mind all the time. This is very hard in the beginning. The mind will rebel. The mind will pop up every kind of excuse. You see, in our Puranas, Indra? Indra.
Yes, Professor.
Chakra. Right. What do you know about Indra? And what does Indra do to men and rishis who meditate?
He sends apsaras to disrupt their
Yeah.
meditation.
Yes. Or all kinds of distractions. But apsaras are his favorite tool. Right? Indra is the mind in its purest form. Indra is also the one who first saw Brahman. Shakra pravidvan pradishas chatasraha. Shakra pravidvan. He was the first knower of Brahman. But in our Puranas, it's conceptualized that this supreme mind in the form of Indra doesn't want others to get to his position. Right? It is a beautiful symbolic way of saying that when you try to meditate, it's going to be hard. Okay. This is a more Puranic way of explaining it. From a yogic way of explaining it, the mind has 4 faculties: manas, ahankara, chitta, buddhi. Correct. Now, in order to, first of all, your buddhi is operating because you're listening to all this. When you go and sit in meditation, your buddhi is operating. The more and more you put buddhi as the faculty that is the king, you put buddhi on the throne of your mind, you will tremendously uplift yourself. Whenever your better judgment, your reason is the king, right? That person cannot go wrong. So when you sit in meditation, first of all, you put the buddhi in the throne. But your mind is not used to the buddhi sitting in the throne all the time. So there are some unruly fellows in the court. And the manas is the first one. So immediately it will import some sensations. And it will say, oh, mosquito is biting me, it's hot, it's so sticky, I am feeling itchy, etc., etc., etc. These are the first set of conquests we have to make. So the first set of conquests is putting the mind in its place, allowing the manas to sit and not trouble. This is only achieved if buddhi constantly sits in the throne and disciplines the manas like a bad errant child. It has to bring it. But not only an errant child, you also befriend the mind. Rather than trying to fight it, it is to gently redirect it. That's where buddhi really has its power. So rather than being disciplinarian, what Buddhi says is, listen, look at yourself. If you do this monkey business, you're not going to help me. So please don't do this monkey business. And when the mind is repeatedly entreated like this, the mind will listen, provided Buddhi is sitting on the throne, right? So this way the mind becomes trained. Now that's only the first step, because after the manas has been trained and the importing and exporting of through the sense organs, both the Jnanendriyas and the Karmendriyas, has been sufficiently restrained. Unfortunately, Indra has another ally, which is the Chitta, the storehouse of memories. So those will start playing. So the moment you have achieved some level of equanimity with respect to the external, now all the internal tapes will start playing. All the things that agitated the mind. Now, the degree of agitation of any memory is directly proportional to the level of ahankara in the mind. Think about this. The experiences that upset us the most are the ones that strike closest to our ego. If I single you out and shame you, or blame you, or insult you, or demean you, those memories will stick for a very long time. It is actually a kind of trauma, right? Those will not go away easily. And when the mind comes to rest, those will pop up and harass you, right? Now, the yogis were already very advanced psychologists, and the methods they prescribed were very advanced. So it is not so easy to immediately let go of the ego sense, right? Okay, and we do have to come to there, and unfortunately, in the modern world, there are instances of trauma which are truly traumatic, in the sense that for such a person, yogic meditation is, they're not ready for it yet. They probably have to go through some other procedures, such as a therapeutic mental health intervention, till the mind can become reasonably well adjusted to engage in yogic meditation. Because there are some very serious situations. Unfortunately, we live in Kali Yuga, and not everybody has been treated very well in their lives. So one has to exercise a lot of gentleness and sweetness and support for that individual till they are healed to the point where, and this is quite widespread. It is far more commonplace than we think. Right. But at least yoga philosophy gives us a way to analyze and understand the psychology of this. So why do these deep embedded traumatic experiences get stuck in our mental library of memories? Even if it is not a serious trauma, let us say a small thing. I'll give you a small example. You call a friend and you want to help, or you want to share something, but the friend is busy, and you get a text back saying, can't talk right now. Okay. Immediately you will kind of feel, well, how many times we feel a small slight or a small rebuff, right? So now how do we normally handle it? Distract ourselves, or maybe eat an ice cream, or some coping mechanism everybody has, which is a pleasurable experience to counteract the pain. This is normal, but it's not very healthy. Because if those coping mechanisms are unhealthy, like going out to have a drink, or worse still, sitting at home and having a drink, and not one but two or three or four, the coping mechanism gets out of hand, right? But one needs a healthy ego to survive in the world, right? Nobody can be egoless. You need a pure and ripe ego, but you cannot be egoless in today's world. This is not possible. In order to even eat and drink, you need ego, right? So that you can put it in your mouth. There is a sense of possession there, right? So what is recommended is that if those experiences are not too bad, they can be analyzed on your own. Right? And slowly, slowly, this chitta can also be brought under control. So the tape learns to turn off. The memory tape knows that at this point in meditation, I am requested to calm myself down and turn off the memories for the moment. And then when the buddhi experiences the joy of the self by turning inward, then all these fellows learn their business. Once they experience the joy, once the mind is flooded with the joy of the self, then next time you sit in meditation, they will all behave themselves, because they will say, hey, this is a good deal here, okay? This is better bliss. We are not able to accomplish this in our day-to-day life. So let's shut up and listen. Okay? So that's the key. You want to get to that point where meditation starts to become a joy rather than a chore, where it is a intrinsically blissful rather than an imposition. It's not an exercise. It's same thing you find with physical exercise also, right? The first couple of times you go, if you say you're on an exercise schedule, you go, you tell yourself, I'm going to exercise 3 times a week. The first couple of times you do it, it's actually painful, sluggish. Then once it becomes a habit, then it's actually fun because you release endorphins, you feel happy. Then the memory of the endorphins is there in your mind. So next time somebody says, hey, do you want to go exercise? You'll say, yeah, sure, let's do it. Because I know what is there afterwards. Meditation is the same way. It's mental exercise, right? So Bhagavan is saying that suppose these are not so easily accessed, and that's fine. Yet by listening to those who talk about the self, right, one may still, and most fantastically, cross the ocean of samsara and overcome death. Now, this is an interesting question. Death itself is quite fascinating. I hope you don't mind if I talk about it. Just a few days ago, I was thinking, our days are pretty repetitive. Have you thought about this? Every day you get up, the sun rises, it's morning, you do something, it's fairly routine, okay? And especially those of us who are blessed with the fact that food is abundant, we have jobs, we are not in some crisis situation. Right? Unlike our early ancestors, like the hunter-gatherers, see, for them, life was, every day was a battle. Imagine if you're a hunter-gatherer, 12,000 years ago, you crossed from Africa over the Beringia, the strait, come into, say, America, the early inhabitants. You have to eat every day, right? So you have to hunt and kill something or find a berry or something because there is no grain. You can't, if you just eat berries, you'll feel very light. You cannot fill yourself, right? So every day you have to plan. And if you don't kill something, you don't eat that day. Correct? Isn't that a challenge? So your whole day is occupied with this thing of, gosh, I have to eat today, right? Even if you go from there to the farming, agriculturist society, agrarian, settle down. Now what do you have to do? You have to get up with the crack of dawn and start farming. You have to do either the planting or the plowing, tilling, then planting in the right season, irrigation, getting rid of bugs and pests, making sure animals don't come and eat the produce, and then hoping and praying, a lot of praying, so that there is no hail or some storm that destroys the crop. And then finally harvesting. And then once the crop is harvested, you have to protect it from mice and rodents and pests and keep it dry. It's a tremendous, think of how much we have outsourced. Today, we just open the fridge and eat something. But in reality, the very process of living was a very great effort in those days, right? Now, we have don't have all that effort. So have we gotten better? Have we become tremendously more spiritual? Have we transcended? No, we've not. In fact, we've become worse. Okay? Those people were far more in touch with the truth. So what do we do there? Okay. So then we see our days are very routine. So we can get very depressed. Or we can say it's very boring. So what is the big change in life? The big change in life is death. It's the one surprising thing that's going to happen that's not routine. Yes or no? So then should one anticipate and live for death? No, that doesn't make much sense either. Okay. Then the question comes, so why is this death the big change? To the person who is embedded in the living world, who only knows the world of the senses, death is the big change, right? To the Gyanis, what happens? Jatasya dhruvo mrityuhu. On birth, death is certain. Dhruvo janma mritasya cha. This we don't know, we forget. Once death happens, rebirth will happen again. This is the greatest and most important fact given to us by our rishis and our gyanis and our gurus, that we don't know because we have not experienced it in our current waking state, unless you have performed the meditative practices, attained samadhi, and re-entered the body. Then you know what rebirth is. So whether you like it or not, this death will not be just one interesting change. It's one in a cycle of changes. After that, birth will happen again, unless one uses this birth to make sure there is no more birth. So this is very fundamental. Grief at the time of death is a very childish reaction. That is for the total children. Because think about this. Everybody who is remaining in the waking state in the body grieves. But nobody knows what happens to the person who has departed. What if they are enjoying all the joys of life in a totally cool place, having fun? You don't even know that. And you're bawling away like an idiot. Does it make any sense? It doesn't make any sense. You have no clue what has happened to that person. Yes or no? Yes or no? Why do we grieve then? It's ridiculous. You don't even know. They may be having a ball. We grieve because we are attached. And something that happened before will not happen again. If you look at it very logically, right? And in fact, so then you should it makes sense to take recourse to those who have crossed the portal of death and know what lies beyond. And what they tell you is that, listen, and you can know this also. You don't have to believe them. If you do dhyanam and you attain samadhi, you will know this also. At the time of departure, the senses, pranas, along with the mind, will leave the body. And they will leave the body towards that destination that the mind is focused on at the time of death. Prayana kale. So whatever you think of at the time of death, at that transition point, the mind is going to go towards that. Based on the experiences, the karmas, up to that point, the balance, punya versus apunya, there will be enjoyment in another loka called Svargaloka till that merit is exhausted. When that merit is exhausted, that mind will be flung back into the material world to take on another suitable body to then continue the cycle. Therefore, if one has faith in this, or if one has experienced it already, then there is no question. Then there is no doubt, right? But given, as this verse talks about, if that, say, Sankhya Yoga or Dhyana Yoga or Karma Yoga has not borne fruit of this knowledge coming personally, then one should at least listen to what has been said by the greats, by the gurus, that this is inevitable. And so if this is inevitable, then the only sensible recourse is to make all efforts in this life to avoid that. So why should we avoid that? In order to avoid that, one first has to recognize that in the living in this body, although there is pleasure, it is not unalloyed. It always comes with its downside. It's like a roller coaster. You go up and then you come down, and you go up and you come down. And so after a while, the mind gets tired of going up and coming down. And so it says, okay, if I take another body, it's going to be the same deal. So until that thinking becomes well imprinted through one's beautiful prior samskaras, through all the efforts you made in your previous births, through all the spiritual efforts you made. When that becomes clear, and when the Lord's name and the Lord's sports and the Lord's pastimes and the devotion to the Lord and the stuti of the Lord, when these start to attract the mind most beautifully, that mind becomes ready. Right? At that point, the mind is ready for instruction. And then it can take the instruction and act on the instruction. So that is what Bhagavan is saying here, that people take different paths, but this path is open to everybody, right? But even for this path, in today's world, in Kali Yuga, we must first of all recognize that fear of death is pointless. With unwavering logic, we should acknowledge that nobody knows what happens after death. And therefore, no judgment should be made as to what can happen after death. And you have to take what is trustworthy advice, right? And recognize that it is only the mind's attachment that is swaying the emotions so much, right? When these become dhrida nischay, when they become very firmly established, then it's quite easy and quite joyous and quite obvious that the procedures described in the Gita that Bhagavan is outlining are the sensible way, right? And they lead to a place beyond sorrow. So then there's no sorrow, only smiling, right? Because that's our true nature. Does that make sense?
Yes, Professor.
Yeah. So strength in the heart. So where is, what was the next verse? Where were we here? Yes. So Shruti Parayana and Upasana. Huh. So maybe 26 is a good one. We can complete that one for today's group of verses. 26, please.
यावत् सञ्जायते किञ्चित् सत्त्वं स्थावरजङ्गमं क्षेत्रक्षेत्रज्ञसंयोगात् तद्विद्धि भरतर्षभ.
This is very beautiful. Whatever is born, yavat sanjayate kinchit. Sattvam sthavara jangamam. Sthavara jangamam is always a double word that comes together. Sthavaram is unmoving, jangamam is moving. Sometimes it also comes as jangama, jangamam. With jangama and ajangama, sthavara jangamam also. Kshetra kshetrajya sangyogat. Only through the union of this kshetra and kshetrajya, know that, O Bharatarshava, whatever being is born, it happens through this. So, sam utpadyate sattvam vastu. Now, this sattvam, I interpret this as sattvam is the process, it is a guna which leads to illumination, intelligence, cognition itself is sattvam. Okay, so in that sense, here we may interpret it as sentient being. Yavat sanjayate kinchit sattvam means whatever sentient being is born, it is born through the either unmoving or moving, it is through the union of the field and the field knower. So, in that sense, including plants and such like, right? Whatever particularized being is born, unmoving or moving, know that it does so due to the union of the field node and the fleet. Best of Bharata princess. And then there is an objection, etc. Etc. The fruit of right perception, that is the absence of birth owing to the abolition of the seed of transmigratory life, that is nescience, has been stated in 1323. So, Nasa bhuyo abhijayate. Now, I gave first the srishtivad, which is the fact that there is birth, then there is death, and then birth leads to death, and death leads to birth. and hence this is samsara, and one needs freedom from samsara, right? And in truth, the removal of ignorance then results in the perception that there is neither birth nor death, there is no bondage, there is no liberation, there only is. Only isness is there, only existence is there. And that is what Bhagavan is saying here. That is the right perception, because the cause of birth is the union between the field and the field knower. So remember that Purusha, when he has the attachment to the gunas, all experience comes into play. Right? When that Purusha becomes Gunatita, then all that experience is seen to be a mirage. Like a great magician conjuring up a trick, right? So how do we get to know the magic of the great magician? Is by devotion to the Lord first. Right? That upasana then leads to the higher truths. So normally in life, we don't worry about these things. There are so many other things to distract the mind. So study of Bhagavad Gita makes us ponder on the big things, right? Life, death, rebirth, samsara, liberation, nescience, knowledge, true knowledge. And why is that all important? Because it helps us actually live our lives more skillfully. Yoga karmasu kaushalam. In works, great skill. Karmasu kaushalam is brought about by what? Through yoga. Right? So not only is it going to give us the ultimate key to unlock the mysteries of this life, but it's also going to help the actual living of this life in the phenomenal world. If one knows the magic, then one knows how to play with the magic, right? How to play one's part properly in the magic. Very good. Any questions on the beautiful set of verses we read just now? We read only 4 or 5, but they are so penetrating and revealing. 24, 25, 26. Oh, we only read 3 verses. Any questions? Any comments?
Today's verses gave a lot of hope, at
Mhm.
least to me, because especially the verses that said about the Kshetrajya, and then if you don't know about that, some people achieve it through Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, and even lower mind people who don't know about those, they can still learn it by hearing.
Mhm.
I think that gave a lot of hope.
Absolutely. And the thing to remember is that because this law, the Lord, is in everyone, right? No one has been shut out, right, from this. Deep down inside, everyone has the intuitive ability to know it, right? We may think superficially that because I am reading all this thing, you think I know more. I may not know more at all. Who knows? Right? And we may think, oh, we don't know. But God has given the gift to everybody, right? Everyone has been blessed with the presence of the Lord within them. So no one is shut out. And that's a very blissful feeling too. And in that sense, we can say Hinduism is the most democratic of all religions. Right? I'm glad it was inspiring because that was the intent of the verses. So you've really got the point. You're correct. 25 is very inspiring. And neither is 24 really beyond anybody, quite honestly. You know, because one doesn't have to go to a college to qualify in any of these. All that is needed is faith and satsang, cultivation of the company of the wise. This is the first step. That and upasana, devotion, bhakti, shraddha. These are not actually, you don't have to go to a college or you don't get a degree to earn these things. They're so naturally present in everybody. But we have to cultivate them. It's like a garden. You know, in the back, you throw some seeds, the sunlight and the water does the work, right? A little bit of cultivation is needed. So although we may say, you know, in this lifetime, I may not become an Olympic swimmer. I may not become a Nobel Prize winner. So these I can say, yeah, is very difficult. But Shraddha, Bhakti, Upasana, Satsang, I can cultivate with no problem, wherever I am. So that is what is very beautiful. The qualifications, although unique and difficult for some people, are actually democratically assigned to everybody. All we need is to change the mind's attitude towards it. And then it's very easy. So all the paths are open, and definitely 25 gives an easiest path. It says, you know, start with that, and then anything in 24 is also accessible. So, delightful discussion. If there are no more questions, comments, I will say Shanti Mantram. It's nice to resume after a couple of weeks break, and we'll continue. Om Tachamyora Vrunimahe Gatum Yajnayam Gatum Yajnapataye Daivihi Swastirastu Naham Swastirmanushabhyam Urdhvam Jigatu Bheshajam Shanno Astu Dvipadehe Sham Chatushpade Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Enjoyable weekend.
Namaste.
Namaste, uncle. See you.